And what I said was that over the next few years, cost of a 200 plus mile electric vehicle is going to drop along this line. Guess what? I was trolled. I was told, you are smoking something, right? And can I have some? But in fact, it's happening more or less exactly as I predicted. And even in 2014, the mainstream thought that this would happen in the 2040s, not 2020s, right? 2040s. The mainstream was wrong by about 20 to 30 years. Cost curves are like gravity, right? I don't care what your opinion of gravity is. That is settled science for more than 400 years. So the cost curves are gonna keep happening. The only question is how fast, not if. So every single mainstream analyst was wrong. So fleets now have to go electric for purely economic reasons. That's a 650,000 time improvement in just 16 years. The first company that is ready and is approved, essentially they're off to the races. And because of network effects, they're gonna eat everything. If everyone drove a car with autopilot, we would save 900,000 lives globally every year. Anyone who tells you that we're not gonna see level 4 autonomy over the next few years, essentially is not looking at the evidence. The cost per mile of transport as a service is gonna drop to 10 times cheaper than individually owned cars. Any car, even electric vehicles. It's over. Gasoline is gone. Internal combustion engines, gone. We expect that by 2030, 95% of passenger miles will be electric. And the implications, of course, are stunning.
You saw the intro, you know what we're in for, but I just want to make sure that everybody watching understands this is a critically important video and one you will forever regret not watching. We're going to be encountering some extremely uncomfortable, unintuitive, data-driven predictions with truly stunning implications that most people simply will not be able to accept. But I ask you, dear viewer, play along at home. These predictions from a guy with a near flawless track record of making predictions that at the time sound absurd and then turn out to be bang on the fucking money is going to be one of the most difficult pills to swallow yet, but far and away the most important, especially if you own Tesla stock. Did someone say multi-trillion-dollar opportunity that the stonk market and the experts are not yet recognizing? They sure fucking did. Did somebody say brutal bloodbath that's going to disrupt and bankrupt many companies that today people think are near invincible? Sure fucking did. So sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, join Patreon with the card in the corner or the link in the pinned comment because you really are missing out. 193 exclusive videos and counting, plus up-to-date access to my Tesla stock price targets. And fair warning, as I mentioned yesterday, if you're on the fence about joining Patreon, I'm not going to explain why, but I would highly encourage you to make a goddamn decision. I don't care what it is. Don't care if you don't join, don't care if you do join, but I just want to make sure that everybody was given fair warning that if they're thinking about joining, now is most definitely the time and it will all make sense relatively soon. So let's get into it.
Let's talk about transportation. How is this disruption unfolding as we speak? So back to Clean Disruption, my book in 2014, this is the exact same cost curve that I published, 200 plus mile electric vehicles. And what I said was that over the next few years, cost of a 200 plus mile electric vehicle is going to drop along this line. Not every EV, of course, there are going to be EVs in many categories, right? Luxury and so on, but the low end is going to go at that cost curve. I was trolled. I was told, you are smoking something, right? And can I have some?
Sure thing, Tony.
But in fact, it's happening more or less exactly as I predicted.
This is both true and extremely important. As Tony mentions, people laughing at the guy, bro, are you high? What are you smoking? Can I have some? Next minute, his predictions on the fucking money. Long range predictions. At the time when he makes them, people are laughing, mocking, ridiculing, come on man, as if that's going to happen. Next minute, he's right. So, at this particular juncture, this guy has a near decade-long track record of making predictions that seem completely detached from reality, that were more accurate and closer to the money than all of these so-called experts. So, as he makes additional predictions about the future, that to you may sound a little bit absurd. You may have the same reactions as people did many years ago. No way, come on, he really is high. I would encourage you to put aside your hubris, your intuition, and your assumptions. Just consider, what if he's actually right? What might this mean? What are the implications? Especially if I own Tesla stock.
In fact, it may be happening even faster, despite COVID and despite many things that have happened because society has been pushed out of equilibrium. So, but think about it. Look at this cost curve and think about 2025 or 6. What the cost curve in clean disruption predicted was that the market would offer a 200 plus mile electric vehicle by 2025 for about $10,000. When I made that prediction, EVs such as the Tesla Model S were $80,000, $100,000, $120,000. The idea that there would be an electric vehicle that was $10,000 ever, right, a tenth of the cost of Tesla Model S at the time, was just considered insane. And guess what? Geely announced it. Geely announced a new SUV, 200 mile precisely as I predicted, for less than $10,000. It's a 4-meter long SUV. I mean, this is a middle class SUV. And it's happening even faster than I predicted.
So let's talk about this. The guy whose past predictions sound completely insane, way too aggressive, just absolutely ridiculous, totally detached from reality, turns out to have been too timid and conservative in his predictions. Just might want to let that sink in.
And even in 2014, the mainstream thought that this would happen in the 2040s, not 2020s, right? 2040s. The mainstream was wrong by about 20 to 30 years.
This too bears repeating. The so-called experts were not wrong by a matter of months or even years, but decades.
Cost curves are like gravity, right? I don't care what your opinion of gravity is. That is settled science for more than 400 years. So the cost curves are going to keep happening. The only question is how fast, not if.
When I look back and wonder to myself, what exactly were legacy automotive manufacturers, CEOs and senior executives doing over the last 15 years? And then of course it dawns on me, they're engaged in a ferocious circle jerk, patting each other on the back and flat out denying the existence of, refusing to accept any evidence for these predictable cost curves that would have pointed out a few critical and existential threats to their businesses, as well as some incredible opportunities to pursue had they only been willing to look at the goddamn facts. I tell you what, these blind, incompetent, deluded legacy automotive executives wouldn't have been too far out of place a few hundred years ago, burning people at the stake for trying to explain that the Earth orbits the sun. That's not what the child in a gown with a cross said to me. He said that the Earth is the center of everything.
So now we're seeing 10% new vehicle sales are EVs in the major markets in China, in the US, and in many places in Europe, 10%. And it's looking like an S-curve, right? So every single mainstream analyst was wrong.
He's right, they were, and this really matters. This is why you never put anyone on a pedestal. Doesn't matter what they're wearing, where you saw them, their credentials, none of that matters. What matters is their track record. If their job is to make predictions about the future, and their track record of making predictions about the future is embarrassingly inaccurate, they are incompetent, and their future predictions should be duly disregarded. The only reason this would change is if they actually start making accurate predictions. Once again, if you're in the business of predicting things about the future, and you're really bad at predicting things about the future, you are in the wrong business.
So this is a phase change disruption. So EV powertrains can last 500,000 miles. The gasoline vehicle only lasts 140,000 miles. In fact, new GM and Tesla vehicles last 1 million miles. So that's 3 to 7 times longer lasting than the internal combustion engine vehicle. Individuals only drive about 10,000 miles per year. Why would we want a 500,000 mile or 1 million mile vehicle? You know, it would take 50 years to drive such a vehicle. And you know, we don't own cars for 50 years, unless of course you live in Cuba. But fleets can drive 100,000 miles per year. So over 5 years, a fleet car, whether it's a Hertz or Amazon or Uber, over 5 years, they can drive 500,000 miles, which means that over 5 years, they would need 1 electric vehicle or 3 internal combustion engine cars.
So I think what Tony is trying to say is, at this point today, as I record this, Commercial customers who have fleets of vehicles that do more miles than an average consumer does in a single year literally currently require brain damage to do anything other than immediately and urgently transition their entire fleet of ICE vehicles to electric. This isn't a matter of taste or preferences, this is a matter of the fucking numbers. Brain damage is literally required at this point in time to purchase a new ICE vehicle if you're a business that has vehicles operating in their fleet. And if that's true, unless everyone in every business on earth currently suffers from brain damage, we're going to see enormous, and I mean enormous, fleet scale orders of EVs from just about every automotive manufacturer who can make them, Tesla being the number one case in point. Give or take a year ago, Hertz announced the purchase of 100,000 Model 3s from Tesla. Tesla, of course, said, no bulk discount for you, and you have to go order them off the website like everyone else. As far as I'm aware, Hertz literally had people just ordering on the Tesla website 100,000 times. This is important to understand. The commercial reality is today, ICE vehicles make 0 cents in a commercial fleet. 0 cents. And we're not that far away from the same thing being true for consumer vehicles. And at that point in time, consumers will also require brain damage to buy an ICE vehicle. So then the question is, if commercial customers and consumers both require brain damage to buy an ICE vehicle, who's going to be buying ICE vehicles? And here's an even better question. Who's going to be making ICE vehicles? Something to think about.
So fleets now have to go electric for purely economic reasons, right? Because it's already a third of the cost per mile internal combustion engine transportation. And that's not even considering the cost of energy and the cost of maintenance and so on. So this is not a one-to-one substitution. EVs are superior. And that's why you're seeing companies like Amazon go all in on electric vehicles. Now, they will say that they care about climate, right? They would say that they care about green, but we know the reality. They care about green, this green. But that's fine as far as EVs is concerned, because EVs on a per mile basis for fleets are already cheaper than internal combustion engine automobiles. And for individuals, another reason to buy an EV is that you can power your home with an electric vehicle. Try that with your diesel truck or gasoline truck. The new Ford F-150 Lightning, for about $40,000 sticker price, can power your home, the home of the average American, for 3 full days. Think about it. I mean, we're getting more and more outages all over the world, but here in California, we're getting outages. In Texas, we're getting outages, and it's getting worse. Now, EV is, I just talked about phase 1 of the disruption of transportation. Phase 2 is coming. And phase 2, when level 4 autonomous technology is approved by the regulator, is ready and approved by the regulator, right? So we're starting to see many companies that have level 4 out there. Baidu is doing 300,000 rides per quarter. That's what they recently announced. There are dozens of companies pursuing autonomous technology. All we need is one. This is an operating system, right? And if we look at the history of computing, essentially you're going to get 2 operating systems. So think about it, Windows and Mac. Think about iOS and Android. You get 2 operating systems because of network effects. Now, you can add a third that is open source, like Linux, right? But no more than that. All you need is one. The first company that is ready and is approved, essentially they're off to the races. And because of network effects, they're gonna eat everything.
So did he just say the first company to solve autonomy is going to eat everything? I think he said something like that. And if that's true, I wonder what the first company to solve autonomy is going to be. Who would that be? I mean, I guess it'd probably need to be a generalized solution. So something you could pick up and drop just about anywhere on Earth and it'd work rather than mowing people down left, right and center. So that probably rules out any companies whose strategy involves LiDAR and pre-mapping in HD. And I guess they'd also require a reasonably sized fleet to already be in operation so that once they've solved autonomy, there's actually vehicles already available to deploy said autonomous software in. Otherwise, it's going to be a very slow process of scaling up their autonomous fleet. And I guess that would also mean the company would probably need to have a huge unassailable lead in terms of data collection, data labeling, and the whole data flywheel. It's just a shame there's no companies like that because I'd really like to buy their stock. In fact, I might be all in on their stock. Does anyone know any companies that might be in such a position?
It's not going to be number 4. According to Tesla, Teslas with autopilot are already almost 9 times safer than the average American driver. If everyone drove a car with autopilot, we would save 900,000 lives globally every year.
The facts don't lie. The numbers don't lie. The fake news and the hate stream media certainly, however, does lie, as do many of the politicians, investors in competing LiDAR companies, and all sorts of other horseshit as well, who claim that Tesla's vehicles are dangerous, they're unsafe, but the facts are the facts. And I get real mad every time one of these motherfuckers gets between the facts and people's perception, because as Tony points out, this software literally saves lives. Imagine being one of the arse-hats trying to slow the progress and deployment under the guise, the fraudulent claim that you care about safety and saving lives, rather than stifling a competitor or trying to slow down Elon Musk because he makes you look bad. By the way, if anyone's curious, I'm definitely not referencing Mr. Burns, aka Dan O'Clown, aka Dan O'Coward, aka definitely not a steaming pile of human excrement.
And this technology is improving exponentially. In fact, in 2017, I did the numbers, the capability improvement rate, and I and my brilliant co-author, Jamie Arbib, predicted that by 2022, the autopilot would be 10 times safer than the average American driver. We still have 3 months to get there, but it's just about there. And supercomputing power, which is what you need for autonomous technology, is improving super exponentially. So just to give you an idea, in the year 2000, the world's most powerful supercomputer, 1 teraflops, about $50 million, and it was the size of this theater. 1 teraflop, $50 million, the size of this theater. By 2016, an 8 teraflops GPU, $100. You could hold it in your hands, right? That's a 650,000 time improvement in just 16 years.
If only this super shocking, totally surprising, entirely unpredictable information had have been known in the past. We would have learned that the costs of batteries in electric vehicles were predictably declining over time and been able to understand the economic implications, e.g. first fleets would need to be brain dead, then consumers would need to be brain dead to buy ICE vehicles, and that was predictable. We could look and go, okay, that's about the point in time where that happens. We also would have learned that the price performance of computers was growing exponentially and predictably, and we would have been able to determine whether or not it might be possible to develop very safe autonomous vehicles at a certain point in the future. But unfortunately, there's no such thing as cost curves. Therefore, it was impossible to predict, and therefore, if anyone ever happens to be successful in either manufacturing electric vehicles at scale or autonomy, they got lucky because it was impossible to predict. And everybody who ends up going bankrupt because they failed to predict this impossible thing, well, it's definitely not their fault because, as I said, it was impossible to predict. It's not their fault. They're not idiots. They're not naive. They're not blind. They're not incompetent. They're not negligent. They're just unlucky.
That's how quickly supercomputing is improving in cost and capability. And in fact, if you buy an iPhone, a new iPhone or iPad, it includes a GPU, a 15 tera operations per second GPU, 15 for free. AI is improving double exponentially, not just exponentially. Hardware is improving exponentially, software is improving exponentially, AI is improving double exponentially. Over this weekend, I designed, looks like a painting using an AI called Midjourney. And I essentially told the AI to paint San Francisco with Denali, Alaska in the background with, starry sky and so on. And this is what it came up with. I did this in minutes from beginning to end. Art creation will never be the same again because of AI. AI is improving double exponentially. Anyone who tells you that we're not going to see level 4 autonomy over the next few years essentially is not looking at the evidence.
So I think, if I'm hearing correctly, what Tony just said in essence was that anyone who doesn't believe we'll have level 4 autonomous vehicles within just a few years is unequivocally suffering from severe and comprehensive brain damage. Is that what he said? I'm pretty sure that's what he said. Maybe I misheard.
Right? So phase 2, the real disruption of transportation, what we call transportation as a service, or TaaS. And it's on demand. On demand is essentially an Uber that you can call on demand. Autonomous and electric, owned by fleets, not individuals. Why fleets? Because a fleet can drive 100,000 miles or even more. They can utilize an electric vehicle fully, unlike individuals who only drive 10,000 miles. So when TaaS is out, when level 4 autonomous technology is approved by the regulators, the cost per mile of transport as a service is going to drop to 10 times cheaper than individually owned cars, any car, even electric vehicles.
So, according to this dumbass who doesn't know anything and has never predicted anything successfully in the past, and therefore you should duly disregard everything he ever says, especially his predictions about the future, apparently, the cost of personal transportation is going to see a 10x decrease. Now, if that's true, is it possible this will cause a truly seismic disruption, the likes of which we've rarely, if ever, seen before? Spoiler alert, yes. And if that's the case, and if it's a winner takes most market, whoever solves this problem first is going to eat everything, my spidey sense is telling me that if there were a company already in an unassailable lead in terms of solving generalized autonomy, they may be on the cusp of capturing a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. Shame no such company exists. I'd really like to buy their stock.
Right? The idea of individually owned cars is essentially going to go away. 10x has always enabled a disruption. Every single time in history, a 10x improvement in cost and capabilities has always enabled a disruption, and a quick disruption at that. And in fact, with the million-mile EV, this 10x is actually may well be 15x. But think about just the 10x. When it's ready and approved, TaaS is not just going to be 10 times cheaper than owning a car. It's going to be 4 times cheaper than just the operating costs of an existing car. Essentially, if your uncle gave you a car, a gasoline car, so you got it for free, the costs of operating that car, gasoline and maintenance and so on, are going to be 4 times higher than the cost per mile of TaaS. It's over.
Remember when I told you earlier that some shit's going to sound crazy, but really it's worth suspending disbelief and just playing along at home, given this guy's track record of near flawless predictions, long-range predictions about disruptive, innovative technology, cost declines, so ridiculous and absurd sounding that at the time literally everyone on Earth is laughing at the guy, and then it turns out he was right? Let's take a moment here to consider the implications. If he's right and the cost of transport as a service is 4 times cheaper than just the cost to operate, not even including maintenance, just to operate a personally owned vehicle, do you think this might change consumer preferences in terms of whether or not they'd actually like to personally own a vehicle for their own personal transportation? Now, I'm sure many of you will have a gut reaction, well, no, man, I want my car. It's my car. I don't want people in that. I want my car. Kind of like how no one would ever want to stay on an Airbnb. That's disgusting, staying in someone else's house. Plus, who would want people to stay in their house? That's not going to happen. Consider your own personal situation. If it's literally 4 times cheaper to order an autonomous electric robotaxi every time you need to get anywhere and have it arrive in moments, and for you to not even need to pay attention while in the vehicle, you can do useful, productive work, or just waste your time watching YouTube, and you no longer need to garage, maintain, renew insurance, or any of that shit. Is it possible that you personally may consider giving up personal car ownership? I gave up personal car ownership years ago. Literally haven't owned a car for like 4+ years now because I don't need one. I hail on demand now. I just have human drivers rather than software, but it's the same shit. In order for me to have a car here where I live, the total cost just to have a fucking garage for this thing in the middle of a big city here with extremely high real estate prices, be costing me tens of thousands of dollars a year just for the parking space. Doesn't make sense. Now, don't get me wrong. There will be some people who cling to the idea of a personal car for their own transportation for years after it becomes economically insane. But the question isn't, will there be some people who still want to own their own vehicles? The question is, will there be any people who are willing to use transport as a service and give up personal car ownership? And I think the answer is fairly obvious. Let's say you're a broke-ass university student. You're living off ramen noodles and alcohol. Are you going to sacrifice and save like crazy and buy your own car for personal transportation and then be spending 4 times as much just to keep this thing going? Or are you more inclined to go, I don't need a car, I'll just use transport on demand. It's cheaper and more convenient, and I don't need to buy a car. Winning, winning, winning. I think this is the last generation that will even consider the idea of owning a car personally, save for some very rare exceptions.
And that's going to enable a major phase change disruption. And of course, when I published this, again, trolls said, you're smoking something, right? Not going to happen. But in fact, within a year of me publishing that report, which was 2017, Elon Musk essentially said, more or less the same thing. Their cars were going to drive 1 million miles, and it was going to cost about 18 cents per mile. Puts it in the same neighborhood as my previous prediction. So the car itself will be transformed from a low utilization, cash burning liability to high utilization, cash generating asset. So that's a major transformation. In fact, transport as a service is going to be so cheap. If you take the cost of just gasoline, the cost per mile of gasoline is going to be higher than the total cost of transport as a service. So if you add up the cost of the car and the cost of the maintenance and the cost of energy and so on, and you add it all up, the cost per mile of TaaS total will be cheaper than just the cost of gasoline on a per mile basis. Gasoline is gone. Internal combustion engines, gone. And that's going to happen quickly.
If what he's saying is true, I certainly wouldn't want to own oil and gas stocks, and I certainly wouldn't want to own any legacy automotive stocks. Gone. Dead. Soon. It's over. Probably an awkward time to mention that to any legacy automotive manufacturers who are still developing new ICE vehicles to enter production a few years from now. The oil and gas companies currently prospecting, investing, spending enormous amounts of capital to extract more oil. Probably not going to age well.
How quickly? Well, we expect that by 2030, 95% of passenger miles will be electric. And the implications, of course, are stunning. So for the oil industry, in 2017, Jamie Arbib and I predicted that by 2030, oil demand would drop by about 30 million barrels, and the equilibrium cash cost at 70 million barrel demand globally would be about $20 to $25 per barrel. And of course, that was considered insane. And guess what happened 2 years ago? Oil demand during COVID dropped to 70 million barrels per day. The cost went down to $20. In fact, it briefly went down to minus $20, negative. That is just the shape of things to come. Now, of course, this has dramatic implications, right? Because what happens? We hit peak demand for petroleum. 2019 seems to have been the peak. In fact, the government of Russia said, yep, we hit the peak. We may never sell that much petroleum again, right? What happens when an extractive political system that fully depends on fossil fuels, right, and is also aggressive and expansionist, what happens when they see peak demand of energy in the rearview mirror? They get aggressive. So in a military think tank in 2016, here's what I asked the generals. My question to them, after saying that we're going to hit peak demand for oil around 2020, I asked, do we have a plan for Russia? Do we have a plan for Russia in the early 2020s? Now, I did not predict that they would invade Ukraine per se, right? But it was obvious to me that they would get aggressive and invade somebody.
So, this guy's obviously not from the future. He's wrong about everything. His predictions suck. You should never listen to anything he says, especially if you're currently in the business of producing internal combustion engine vehicles, you're attempting to compete with Tesla on autonomy, or your main source of revenue is anything at all to do with fossil fuels. Tesla is most definitely not about to eat everything, including the lunch, breakfast, dinner, and girlfriend of legacy automotive manufacturers and fossil fuel companies. And if you disagree with me, you are just an Elon D rider. Speaking of Elon D riders, if you'd like to join a growing army of nearly 5,000 of them, head over to Patreon with the card in the corner or the link at the pinned comment. Enjoy the spicy, exclusive content, including access to my Tesla price targets and well over 190 exclusive videos and counting. So, I'll see you over there. Love ya.